Yeah, it's telling me that I'm accepting. So
There. Okay. So feel free to start.
So good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Tanguy Prévost. I'm from Belgium, French speaking. That explains the accent. And I'm now based in Czech Republic, in Brno at Honeywell. I got my master's in industrial design from Umeå in 2001. So that's a long time ago. But I don't think things have fundamentally changed, maybe the way we call things, but you will see that I'm quite sure what I'm going to say is going to sound familiar. So let's start. And this is called designing value because obviously we talk about making things attractive, desirable, and valuable to the people who buy them. And so understanding the user needs and customer needs, that's, as Peter said, pretty fundamental, and that's how we get started. So let me see. Yeah, I'm just going to go like this. So these are, we have this way when we use this to across our process. This is also a way for us to evaluate our progress in the project. So on the left, we have BXT, business experience technology. Basically, whatever you do, you have to find the right intersection between a viable business. So there is a way to sell that thing and get some revenue out of it. A feasible technology, obviously, the thing is doable, feasible, and it delivers a desirable experience. If you have one of those three things missing, you're just not going to make a living out of it. And by the way, even if you're in charity business, you're still going to have budgets to meet and so on. So you still need some sort of business model that is viable with your funding that you have. If you don't have any desirable experience, you're in commodity business, you're selling rice or you're selling steel tubes. And then the only way you can compete is on price. And that means you're going to just have less and less margin, which is not necessarily what your employer is going to want. So really having those three things put together is the first key to some kind of success. And how do we get there? So we use the right side. First question that you have to ask yourself is what high value problem are you solving for whom? We're going to go through a few slides and details on what those questions mean, right? Why these problems and not others? Because you're not going to save the world and everything at once in one project. So you're going to need to make choices. How will you measure success in solving these problems? That's a super important question because that will define when is the end of your project. That will define if you pay the rent and feed the kids, if you are a freelancer and your customer at some point needs to pay the invoice, and to justify that you are invoicing, you need to justify that you finished something. And so for that, you need to measure what is good enough and what is not good enough. How high is the bar for success? Is it achievable? That's about calibrating the resources to the ambition of the project. Again, if you are a freelancer and you are put in front of mission impossible, then my advice will be to walk away and not just get into a dead end where you don't get paid, you don't pay the rent, and you don't feed the kids. And then what are your solutions and why will they succeed? That's obviously the way to a question that you ask yourself each time you have a project review and you work with your peers, your the other functions, your managers, leaders, customers. So what are we proposing and why are we confident that it's going to work? So first question, what are the problems that we solve and for whom? So you start with who. Who are we serving? So we call that a stakeholder map. And basically, we ask ourselves who plays a role in this whole business model, whatever that is, that business model. By the way, currently I'm designing personal protective equipment, so safety products for workers, industrial workers, but that applies to pretty much anything. That was also applying when I was designing packaging for chocolate bars or beer. Yeah, it's who plays a role in the business, who pays, who earns, and who decides. It's not always the same thing. So a very simple example is smoke detectors. I am absolutely certain that every single one of you has a small detector at home, in the apartment, or in the corridor of the student rooms. You are all the users, because if that thing beeps, you are the ones who get the information. You are the user. But none of you has chosen the smoke detector that is installed in your home. So who does that? Well, the architect, for example, knows that by law in Europe, there will be smoke detectors probably in the corridor near the kitchen. So he's going to put it in the drawings, but he's probably not the one choosing the smoke detector. Why would he? Doesn't care. The investor who is deciding to build that block of apartments with 50 apartments doesn't care at all about the smoke detector. All he or she knows is that they have to get a supplier to install smoke detectors. So at some point, someone in that business model is going to send a request for quotation to a few companies that are installers of smoke detectors. And those companies are going to make offers that are divided in two lines. One line is going to be the cost of the 50 detectors. The other line is going to be the labor cost, how much time it takes to install those detectors. So when they will choose, the investor is going to choose, probably based on total cost, is going to choose a company that is going to install detectors. That means that company is choosing the smoke detector that is in your home. That's the installer. That is the decision maker. So if you design smoke detectors, who do you need to make happy? The installer, first of all. And to make the installer happy, you're going to make something that is easy to install, quick, that he can maybe install it without going up and down on the ladder, so he's less tired, that kind of stuff. So first question, who has the problem that you're trying to solve, and what is that problem? Yeah, that's fundamental. And it's not necessarily the end user, not necessarily the one who pays. It can be quite complex. So you need to ask yourself that question thoroughly. So then let's say, okay, we identified that our installer is the guy we're trying to help. Now we need to understand what is really his problem or her problem. What's the pain? What are they complaining about? So we do what we call VOC, voice of customer, and OVOC, observational voice of customer. In any case, that means you find a way to reach the customer and get the information. If it's simple VOC, that's going to be, let's say, a conversation, an interview, maybe a survey online. If it's OVOC, that means you really go and have a look at what they do, how they do their job, you film it, and you look for the moments where they need to improvise or the moment where they need to work around an obstacle. Now, on the right, that's called an empathy map. I think you know that probably. It basically says that if you have an interview with someone, you know what they're saying. You probably know part of what they are thinking, but not necessarily all of it. If you are not observing, you don't really know what they are doing, because people, when you ask them to describe their workflow, it's not obvious that they give all the details. There's a lot of tasks that people do automatically on autopilot. So they will forget to mention things, right? So you know what they say, you get a hint of what they're thinking, you're not sure to know everything they're doing, and you probably don't know how they are feeling. You don't know if they are proud of their work or if they are on the edge of burnout or anything like this. They're not going to tell you that if it's just a first time interview. So it's really about building relationship, meeting customers, partnering with them, kind of involving them in the development of your product. This way you get to know better. Of course, if you've done the job, like if you have worked for a few weeks in a factory that is doing, let's say, automotive assembly, then you're going to know a lot more about the pain points and the problems that these workers are facing, and you're going to know more how to help them, right? Again, I love that quote. If I had asked them what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. People are good at talking about the solutions they imagine, and the solutions they imagine are based on their knowledge of the technology or their knowledge of the trade. They're not necessarily, users are not, or customers are not necessarily visionary people, and they are not necessarily good at describing the root cause of the pain, the real problem. So your job as a designer is to go find out what is really the problem. Do not just follow the advice. Go find out, why. Go find out what is behind it. All right, so let's say you've met that installer or that important stakeholder, and you have a lot of information, the things they complain about, the things they dream of, the things that they love and they don't want to change, etc. So we then rephrase that as an EXO, an experience outcome. Basically, what we try to do is to describe the outcome, describe what's going to be the consequence of the product or the offering that we are creating. We're not saying, I'm going to design a machine that does this. No, no, no. We're saying our device is going to let the family put a picture on the wall without damaging the wall, right? Let's the user do a task, a job to be done, put a picture on the wall, success criteria, without damaging the wall. That's how you brief yourself or your team for development, because if you work at 3M, you're going to talk about adhesives that don't damage the wall. If you work at Samsung, you're going to talk about projectors that project the image on the wall. If you work at IKEA, you might talk about a picture frame that is standing on legs, or like whatever. I'm just making this up right now. The point is that same design brief is going to depend on the kind of industry you're in, the kind of product category your employer prefers to develop and launch because they feel they have the right to play in that business, etc. So let's the user, job to be done, success criteria. We phrase everything like this. And of course, for one product, you can have several of them. Yeah, let's the user do that task in less than 3 minutes. Let's the user do that same task without falling. Let's the user do that same task without needing gloves. You can have a bunch of them. Just that's going to define, that's a way to create the criteria that you need to pass. That's related to the question about what are your success criteria. You need to know what is success so that you make a design that does that, not necessarily more, and certainly not less. So how do you do that? By the way, designers, engineers, and so on, developers, we create features. We're not creating solutions or anything else. We create features. We decide our thing, that offering, whether it's a software, a product, a service. Let's pretend it's an object right now. It has dimensions, it has things sticking out, and it has holes, and whatever that is, that's features. And we do those features because we think those features bring a benefit. And we believe that those benefits have value. Now, what's important to understand is that you control the feature. And then the customer, the stakeholder, the one who decides that he or she is going to buy your stuff, cares about value. So here's an example. One of the features of your new technology or new machinery is that it has high reliability, so very low downtime, very short maintenance time. So the benefit, of course, is increased uptime for that factory that is using your machinery. Perfect. Now, how much value does that have? So maybe for some company is wasting $40 million a year in downtime because they need to do maintenance on their machines, and so all that time of maintenance costs them $40 million. So let's assume that you have a new solution and that you're going to reduce the downtime by half. So if they would have your machines, they would only lose $20 million a year. That's the value of your invention or your design. It's the value, the money that they are not wasting or the money that they are saving. So say that the 40 become 20, that means what? That means you can charge maybe 15 millions for that technology, because then you charge 15, they are happy because the first year they already saved 5, and the next year they save 20, etc. So the value is going to define your pricing, right? The cost of what you do, the cost of manufacturing a part has absolutely no relationship with the price of that part. The only, there is one relationship. The cost has to be lower than the price. Otherwise, you go bankrupt. But how much margin you have, that has absolutely nothing to do with the cost. That has to do with the value. How attractive is your product or your offering? And basically, the cost of the problem that you solve. You remove some incentive for the customer, and the rest is the value of your offering. All right. So now, how do we make features that deliver that value, either in emotional triggers or in functions, like straightforward functions? this slide is quite important to me. I'm like allergic to the word intuitive because I systematically get offering managers telling me in the brief that the product has to be intuitive. Intuitive, that's for beginners, or it's for panic situations. So if you design a rescue device that obviously is going to be used in a panic situation, then yes, it has to be ultra intuitive because people don't think, they just panic. But your user, your end user is not necessarily a beginner, and your end user can be a Formula One driver, an Air Force pilot, or basically highly trained, super high cognitive skills, super high good motorics, super fit, whatever. And you know, you don't need to do intuitive for those people. So what is important is affordance and adequacy. So affordance is the ability to be understood. I don't understand anything on that steering wheel on the right, the Formula One steering wheel, but the guys who are using that, they understand all of it. So that's what matters. Affordance is the ability to be understood by the user, and adequacy is the ability to be accepted and relevant to that business or to that customer, to that decision maker. Okay, that's much more important than doing intuitive stuff. Exception again, if it's panic or if it's beginners. Now, there's this guy, Mr. Cano, who has made that really clever model describing features. So I said we are creating features, right? And he makes 4 categories of features. One-dimensional, must have, attractive, and reverse. So a one-dimensional you see on the from left to right is how well the feature is implemented, and the bottom up is how satisfied the user is going to be. So a one-dimensional is, let's say, a waterproof watch, a wristwatch that is waterproof for divers. So obviously, if the watch is not waterproof or only allows you to go like 3 meters deep, then divers are not happy. They're not satisfied. And there are watches that go like 20 meters, 100 meters. The deeper you can go with the watch, the more you're going to satisfy the divers who want to go deep. That's just linear, straightforward. The better you do, the more satisfied they are. Must have will be, for example, regulatory requirements. Like you do a protective equipment, it needs to be approved by some EN standard or some ANSI standard for North America. And so it needs to pass some homologation tests. If you don't pass the test, you don't sell your product. That's that simple. You cannot even call it protective equipment. If you pass the test, customers see the stamp, they're happy. That's all they need. So it's a must-have. Now, let's say that there is a requirement that says that some force cannot exceed 8 kilonewtons at some point in the usage. Whether you manage to go down to 6 or to 5, they don't care. The users and customers don't care, because what they care is that you have the stamp that says that you don't go over 8. Okay, so that's typically the kind of feature or performance where there is no point overdoing. Yeah, there is a balance between how much effort you put into something and how much effect it has. And in this case, for the must-haves, usually you must do enough effort to have it, but there's no point overdoing it. Now, attractive features, that's the delighters, that's the good surprise. So that's the thing that if it's not there, the customer doesn't know that they could have had it. So they are not frustrated because they don't know that you actually had that idea. If you put it there, they're happy about it. The better you do it, the more excited they are. And what is important there is to understand that those features and all of those, they don't keep that status very long. So let's take the example of infotainment in cars. There was a time when it was super cool to have a radio in a car. That was like not expected, and that was an attractive, a delighter feature. Then it became radios with audio tapes, and then radios with CD player, and then it went into infotainment, and now it's full compatibility, Android or iOS. And basically, you need to pay extra option to have a CD player in a car nowadays. So what used to be a super exciting feature, a delighter, has become taken for granted and then even forgotten. So that's what the big blue arrow is showing, that it's all transitioning, constantly moving from being an exciting new feature to being something that is taken for granted and expected. There is a, let's say, a time element to this. Expectations evolve. Quick word on the reverse feature. That's when you just do the wrong thing. But it's a bit more sophisticated than this or complex than this. Let's imagine that you are designing laundry machine and the target group is young couples. So you try to do something affordable because they have their first job, but they are not paid tons and they're moving in and they need a laundry machine that is affordable. And then someone's going to say, oh, you know what, we can sell the affordable laundry machine to the retired people because their income just dropped. And if they need to change machine, they want an affordable one. The thing is that affordable is probably the only feature that is going to work in common for the two target groups. If the one for the young guys is having some kind of touch display and tons of menus and 90 programs, it might be appreciated by the young guys, but it might scare off the senior users who would prefer a rotary knob with 4 programs. So again, a feature, and I'll get back to that, a feature can go against you, that you think you add value, but in fact you do the opposite, or you think you add value and in fact you're just wasting your company's money. Now, how do we know? I mean, I gave you examples that are quite, let's say, intuitive. Like you can guess from the examples I was giving that it seems to make sense, but there should be a way to measure that. So what Mr. Cano did is this model, he's basically working in surveys. So you would make an online survey. This is an extract from a survey we did when I learned about the Cano model. And we interviewed like about 120 something people online. And the trick is that for each feature, you make a functional question and a dysfunctional question. So how would you feel if that feature is there? How would you feel if that feature is not there? And the people have a multiple choice. So they need to answer, I like it that way, it must be that way, I am neutral, I can live with it that way, or I dislike it that way. So in our example, we were talking about thermostats. At the time, Honeywell was making thermostats. And so how would you feel if you could control your thermostat through voice control on your smartphone? That was the functional question. The dysfunctional question, how would you feel if you could not control your thermostat through voice control on your smartphone? And people answer to those questions, and then we cross-reference. You see that the chart here, you have on one side the functional question and on top the dysfunctional question, and we see how many answered what to each thing. So what you see there is that you have around 60 people that are in the purple indifferent category. That means they don't care about that feature. Then you have how many? 20 something people that are in the what is that, orange reverse category, and 25 in the attractive category. So that tells us that of all the people we interviewed, there was probably 3 market segments in there, because you have people who don't care, people who love the idea, and people who really hate the idea. And then you ask, as a business, as a company, with your offering managers, marketing people, etc., you need to ask yourselves, which ones are we trying to reach, and at what cost, right? In this case, if that group that we interviewed is the group we need to sell the stuff to, and we see that the large majority either hates it or doesn't care, then we should not bother doing any work to deliver that feature in our offering. And because it's better to frustrate less than 20% of the market than to frustrate 80% of the market, right? That's quite simple. It's a really nice tool. It takes a bit of statistics. I don't even I relied on colleagues who know better to do the statistics behind, but it's a really nice tool to understand those different categories of your features. Now, what I just said about not spending energy doing something that the market doesn't want, I would say that's applicable even for what the market wants. Like, don't waste your time and company resources on stuff that is not going to help anybody. Again, who are you trying to help? What problems do they have? and deliver on that and don't deliver on the rest. And it's a really healthy exercise when you have any idea, any sketch, to ask yourself, what can I remove? What do I not need? And also, what else is around that I can use and leverage? I think this picture is kind of like self-explanatory in a sense. Like you don't need a trolley that has 4 wheels and then put 5 jerry cans in the trolley, right? To carry the same amount of water. This is the much better solution. But here's another example. When I was your age, DVDs were not that old and they were still kind of cool. And so the first DVD players, they had a display that was showing you how many seconds or minutes had passed, how many tracks there would be, that kind of stuff. And quite frankly, at the very beginning, it was useful because people like me were used to stuff that gives you a direct feedback. When we were playing a VHS tape or an audio tape or a CD or an LP before, there was always some kind of feedback. You knew that thing is turning and the sound is coming soon. But then, so for a DVD, it was kind of like a historical legacy, the habit. You put the thing in there and you close it, and there was a display that says, yes, yes, I'm working on it. It's coming. But then, of course, at some point, someone figured out that the DVD, by definition, the DVD player is plugged into a TV. So why would you put a 2-inch LCD display on a device that is connected to a 25-inch or more display? So for you, young people, it's obvious that there is a remote control and that it's through the screen of the TV that you control the Xbox or whatever is connected to it right now. But that's the point. The first guys who designed DVD players, they put a display. And if you ask yourself, do I really need every component? What else is around that I can use? Oh, there is a TV that is always there. I can leverage that. So in your designs, do the same. Ask yourself, since you know who is the user, because that's the first question we ask, and you know what problem you're trying to solve, so you know what other tools that person is using, you know what infrastructure that person is in, you know if that person is indoor, outdoor, etc. And what else can they use and what can I remove from my stuff because they're going to use the other stuff that is available. All right, so I keep talking about features and market segments or target group. Of course, in a company like Honeywell, we always want everything to be growth ready. Yeah, we want to make a lot of money quickly. That's what this company is about. And when we put energy in developing something, we want to make that thing so that we can make more of it, more variants of it, serve more markets, more segments, and make more money. So we make platforming, and we approach it by platforming. Platforming from a user standpoint, that means you analyze the kind of people that you want to target, the kind of criteria that matter to them, you know, the problems they have. And for example, here on the left, we say that cost is an important element, comfort is an element. I don't know what this is about, by the way. It doesn't matter. Cost, comfort, size, certification, weight, and parameter, blah, blah, and blah, blah. So we give a score to those parameters that we have. And then through, again, VOCs, OVOCs, and partnering with the customers, we realize that the few market segments that we know and that we can probably reach with our infrastructure have different needs. So there will be a segment that accepts a high cost and doesn't care much about comfort and wants the size to be quite small, but has some demands on certification, wants the weight to be super low, etc. And there are other segments that maybe there will be a segment that want the cost to be super low that doesn't really care much about comfort either. By the way, it seems all the market segments want that thing to be very light. All the segments seem to not care if it's comfortable. So you define that red area. That's going to be the area that your playground. What is not in that red area is that question 2. Why these problems and not others? So that's the stuff you decide you don't care about. Because if you try to make something that is super comfortable, super small, has all the certifications, super light, super cheap, like super everything, you're just going to not achieve it probably, or you're going to take forever and the business is gone by the time you're done. So choose your battles, define that playground. And then what we see on the right is that now you have your playground. You're going to start with the first minimum viable offering, the first product, the first offering that you're going to launch. And that's the red line. That's the positioning that you decide is going to be the core, the first thing that I'm going to put on the market and going to get us on the map. And then the variants, the by removing some stuff, I'm going to lower the cost and I'm going to serve another market segment, etc. That's to populate that gray space with more of those red lines later. And then, of course, we are in 2022, and hopefully the planet is going to be viable for quite a while. So we need to do our best to be good ancestors. That means what? Of course, that means environmental sustainability. For me, the important bit in that slide is that every single item in your project, every single function you're going to work with, whether it's sourcing, finance, engineering, manufacturing, sales, etc. Everyone has a role to play in sustainability. Most importantly, if you don't question your business model, you're probably not going to achieve much. I mean, you can use recycled paper to do your packaging, but that's not enough. So again, in the questions, what problem am I solving for whom? Why these problems, not others? What are the success criteria? How high is the bar? What solutions do you have and why will they work? Actually, hidden in those questions, there is also the topic of sustainability. What is the business model that is going to work? Maybe for some things, rental is more sustainable than selling. For some things, it might be the other way. So ask yourself those questions. As a designer, I think you have the right and by the way, an engineer or anyone in a company, you have the right to voice concerns and opinions on every single aspect. Each function owns the decisions related to their function, but you have the right to influence the decisions of every function. And I really, this is more easy to say than to do. It's actually really hard to do when you are in a very large organization with very rigid structures. But still, it's our responsibility, all of us, to ask the right questions and try to make things better on that field. So again, those 5 questions, you should know those questions by heart. I have some students here in Czech Republic, in Brno University. I'm telling them that's the one slide that they cannot forget from my classes. They need to remember that by heart, because that's a really easy way also for you to keep track of your progress in your project. You develop stuff and you keep asking yourself, is what I'm doing necessary and helping that person that I'm trying to help, or is it just satisfying me and my ego because I'm having fun sketching it? Why am I spending my time on this? Is it really what I'm supposed to do, etc.? What problem for whom? Why these problems, not others? How do you measure success? And as I mentioned it, it's also, if you are a freelancer, it's even more useful, because when you work in agency or as a single freelancer, as I have done in the past, you even more need to justify what you're doing and to justify your invoices to the customers. So then your ability to feed the family and pay the rent is at stake. So really, those questions are fundamental. That's basically the thing. I have here a video, and I'm gonna, if I manage, put the link in the chat just in case the video does not really work through the thing. It's a presentation video of a tripod that I worked on 7 years ago. If I manage to get to that screen again. Wow. How do I get there? And actually, no, I don't need that because I had it open. Sorry. I'm lost with the screens. Incredible. Okay. So this is a tripod That means for workers who need to go down in manholes and confined spaces. As you can see, I might even do it a bit faster because it's not very useful to see that first part. So this is a tripod, and the basic brief was make a tripod, which is very basic, like a thing that has 3 legs and that can carry the weight of 2 guys and some equipment above a hole. But then what we realized is that installing it is an absolute nightmare. For example, this one, when you pull the leg to the maximum as he just did, the leg does not fall out of it. So he can go to the maximum. I've seen competitors where you cannot see the video. Now you can see the video. I'm sorry. Let me redo this quickly here. He's unboxing. That's not important. He can carry it by one hand, which is already not what competitors offer. He can open the 3 legs, they are locked with one button, and the legs are synchronized. So he pulls on one that opens the 3 legs. Here, the leg comes out fully and doesn't fall out. The foot self-balances, so it's always in the right position. There are 3 positions depending on the diameter of the hole that you want to be above. For the big diameter, you need that webbing for safety. And we designed the leg so that it's super fast and easy to put the webbing in the hook of the leg. Now, this is a winch. Actually, that's the Mighty Vac. So it's a self-retracting lifeline. We put it on a bracket so that while you are securing it, you don't carry the weight. That thing is 15 kilos. So on some competitor products, you need to hold 15 kilos in the air while attaching it. Now, ours, you hook it on and then you secure it without effort. Same thing for that winch, which is for equipment like tools and stuff. I made it a bit accelerated. I can accelerate a bit more. So then another thing is 2 guys can be attached. There's always one guy that stays at the surface and one guy that goes down. That's for security reasons or safety reasons. There should always be someone able to rescue the other one. So he goes in. They're both attached because the guy at the top could accidentally fall in the hole. So now he has to rescue his friend, so he's using that rescue device. And obviously the tripod has to be stable at that point. Let's go a bit further. So now he's bringing tools, for example. That's just what I just already described. You see standards and directives, of course, matter. Now, we actually did it on purpose in the commercial. We have chronometer for how long it takes to fold it back in place and basically bring it back into your vehicle. I've seen videos on YouTube for competitor products where like the guy basically struggles for 10 minutes. In ours, in 2 minutes, it's folded and you can carry it by one hand alone. That's, I think, just a bit redundant stuff. Yes. So I'm going to go back to the slide. And basically what I wanted to highlight here is that the, sorry, where am I? Here. What I wanted to highlight is that the basic function of the tripod is to be there and carry the weight, and all the competing products do that. But we understood and realized in our process that the pain is not when they are working in the manhole. I mean, we cannot do anything about that with the tripod, but what we can do is help them transport, help them save time and energy installing it and uninstalling it. I have that habit to tell engineering team that think of the worker. It's Friday, November, rainy, windy day, end of the day, yeah, like 4 or 5 p.m. outside. He has to pack his stuff, and the phone is ringing. His wife is asking him when the hell he's going to get home. That's the point where there is time pressure. There is the guy is fed up. He's tired. Doesn't want to do the job anymore. Cold fingers, pain in the muscles, etc. That's what we're trying to solve. Remove all that pain, not the pain from the core of his function in his job, but the pain in the preparation before and after. So that's basically my presentation. That's it. I hope that you have questions. Maybe I said things that didn't make any sense, and I hope you will react.
Any questions, anyone? Nice afternoon.
Yes.
When they can go home. No questions at all? No one?
One thing.
Yes.
The kind of model you had like the line that must be reverse one-dimensional and wow effect. You didn't have the last one, which is indifferent. That's horizontal line.
Let me go back to, how do I do that? I'm fighting with that. Where is my mouse? How do I get to the other screen? Come on, now I look like a complete fool, huh? Yes, okay. Let me get back to this. The slide of the Kano model. And you asked for?
Indifferent line. That's horizontal from feature not implemented to feature will implement.
You're indifferent, then, I mean, that you're not at all on the graph. There is no satisfaction whatsoever. Yeah, it's the horizontal line. It doesn't matter how well you are creating that feature. They're not satisfied. They're not dissatisfied. They just don't care. So you're right. It's the where is it now? Come on, here. Okay, I figured that it's that line that would be, you would be somewhere on that line, irrelevant where you are. And the more you are on the right, the more you are wasting the money of your company. Because if they don't care, why would you execute super well that feature?
Okay. Yeah, another question.
That slide with the steering wheel, so one was intuitive and the other one complicated.
It was intuitive and where was it? Here. Intuitive and expected, and then affordance and adequacy.
Isn't it for most customers better when the product is intuitive? Like for example, now the stand at the end, it'd be better when it's intuitive, even though the users are experts and professionals.
So I would say that that's what I mean with affordance. The product is tailored to the level of practice and training that they have and the expectations that they have of how it's going to work. It is true that if you do something that is so surprising, so out of the ordinary that they don't know how it works, you know, like Citroën used to do, that you didn't even know where to put the key because it was on the left and every other car had it on the right. That's just dumb, because you just frustrate the user, and usually users don't like to feel stupid, like most people, right? But if you define intuitive really as the thing that does not require any thinking or any reasoning, then it's really, you don't need to make things more simple. If you can, like, okay, let me say that. As long as your offering is satisfying the user, meeting all the expectations of the user, and is easier, more intuitive than competing products, you're doing good. Obviously, yes. Yeah, like, it's not wrong to do intuitive stuff if it's not a compromise. But if you make something intuitive, which becomes frustrating for the expert because you have removed a whole bunch of features. Like, imagine someone is an expert at Photoshop, and you say, no, you don't need all that stuff. Here is another software that is just has those 3 brushes and you're good. Quite frankly, I probably only use 10 tools in Photoshop, but I would be frustrated if someone would tell me you're such a fool, such an idiot, a beginner who knows nothing, that you have enough with those 3 tools. I wouldn't like it. I prefer to have Photoshop. And we can argue on that. You know, there's a lot of emotional triggers in this. It's not all rational, but making things super intuitive is not necessarily going to make people happier. So first, make the user that you target super happy. And if you can do it in a simpler way than the competitors, you're doing a great job. Does that make sense? We can agree to disagree, by the way. Yeah, feel free to disagree. I'm going to sleep tonight, even if you all disagree. Don't worry.
And I guess also some things can get less intuitive when you sort of educate the whole market. So let's say the first iPhone had a button for you to press on. So because I mean, before that, no one would expect that you would just drag your finger on a touch screen and something would happen. So it needed to have the button, and then you could interact with the touch screen. While after a while, everyone got used to the touchscreen and they can remove that button and people would still be able to use it. It can also, of course, change when people get more educated and more used to things.
Yes, there's an important concept that I didn't mention in this is familiarity. You know, part of my role here is really to work to drive innovation within Honeywell safety products. And for me, it's super important when you bring something new, something really innovative, there must be a part of it that is familiar. It's about adequacy, acceptance. If you break all the rules, it becomes really hard for the customers, the decision maker, or the user to get used to your stuff, to accept it, to admit that it's actually better than the old one, right? So there must be something that reminds them of something that they know, so that they feel comfortable trying. And then the other part of it is the innovative side of it. And of course, the proportions vary. But if you completely remove the familiarity, you just create an example for an obstacle for yourself, for your own offering. So all these concepts are quite close, right? Familiarity, intuitiveness, acceptance, affordance, adequacy. It's not like black and white stuff. But so to your point, Peter, I think it's really that question of familiarity. And once you are, as you said, once the users are familiar with the touch screen, then you can remove the other element of familiarity because you have built it somewhere else.
Yeah.
And by the way, I don't know if you saw recently, there was a study comparing cars and touch screens, and one of the cars was an old Volvo with a lot of touch buttons. And the test, they asked people to do a sequence of things, like I don't remember, set up the aircon on some temperature, do something, wipers, whatever that was. And they had to do everybody had to do the same sequence in different cars, and they were just checking how many seconds it takes your eyes off the road to do that sequence. And the fastest user did it on the car with physical buttons. And the worst example was a car with a single touch screen where you have to browse through menus and you are forced to look at what you are doing. And during that time, you don't look at the road. So again, that brings us back to, in which context are you? Where is that person? What are they doing? And how is your stuff fitting into what they are doing in their workflow? Driving is a workflow, if you want. When I'm serving industrial workers, so of course I'm always talking about the workflow, like from the moment they get out of the changing room to the moment they get back to the changing room. I need to analyze every single step in between, because if there is any point where they need 6 hands, I have a problem. So it's the same when you design something, check in which system, in which workflow your item is fitted, and leverage what is available, but of course don't create new obstacles. And the whole topic of, you know, things on a tablet, that's intuitive. If you are sitting in the sofa at home and you are browsing, that's super easy. If you're driving a car, it's a different story. So it will always be project specific. There's no hard rule that works all over, which is good because that gives a job to the designers.
Okay, well, thank you for your guest lecture, and let's take a 10-minute break to stretch our legs, and come back and we'll talk about user needs a little bit more. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.